When you hear about ancient empires, your mind probably goes to Rome, Egypt, or maybe Mesopotamia. But there was another kingdom, powerful and proud, quietly thriving on the other side of the Red Sea, in the highlands of what's now northern Ethiopia and Eritrea. This was the Kingdom of Aksum, and it wasn't just some local power. Aksum controlled trade, built monuments, minted coins, and became one of the world's earliest Christian states. Its influence stretched across continents. But long before any of that happened, the land it grew from had already been home to farming communities and early settlements for thousands of years. One of the earliest organized states in this region was a mysterious kingdom called Damat, which rose around the 10th century BC. We don't know much about them. Their records are scarce, and their ruins are hard to date. But what we do know is that they had knowledge of writing, stone architecture, and terracing techniques for agriculture. When Damat declined, it didn't vanish into nothing. Its people and ideas splintered into smaller groups that laid the foundation for what came next. Over time, one of these groups began to dominate the rest. They settled in the fertile lands of the Tigray Plateau and slowly, step by step, built what would become the Aksumite kingdom. By the 1st century AD, Aksum was beginning to show signs of real power. And it wasn't just local power. Its name appears in a Roman-era Greek guidebook called the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, which describes the ports of the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. It mentions a king named Zoskales, who ruled over a kingdom inland from the port of Adulis. That name, Zoskales, is the first known ruler of Aksum to be mentioned in writing. And the fact that a Roman merchant text noted him means one thing. Aksum was already plugged into international trade. Ships coming from the Roman Empire, Arabia, and even India were docking at Aksum's port, exchanging goods, ideas, and cultures. From that point forward, Aksum wasn't just a regional kingdom in Africa. It was part of a larger global network, and it was only just getting started. Aksum's location was everything. Sitting near the Red Sea, right across from southern Arabia, it had a front row seat to one of the busiest trade highways of the ancient world. From the port of Adulis, goods flowed in and out: ivory, gold, incense, ebony, spices, and slaves going out, silk, glassware, wine, and metal goods coming in. Trade ships from the Roman Empire, India, Persia, and Arabia regularly passed through. This wasn't just casual exchange. It was a constant flow that made Aksum rich, powerful, and known across continents. Ivory in particular was one of its biggest exports. Aksumite ivory ended up in Rome, in India, and even in China. The demand for African ivory was massive, and Aksum had access to some of the best sources in the region, especially from the southern territories it would later control. To handle this growing economy, Aksum did something remarkable. It started minting its own coins. Around the 3rd century AD, Aksumite kings began issuing gold, silver, and bronze coins, with inscriptions in Greek, and later, Ge'ez. No other sub-Saharan African kingdom at the time was doing anything like this. The coins weren't just for internal use. They were tools of diplomacy, of power projection, and of trade. Roman merchants accepted them. Indian and Arabian traders found them familiar. The coins often bore the images of Aksumite kings, crosses, or ears of wheat. Simple messages, but ones that told the world, this is a kingdom that matters. And then there were the monuments. Aksumite kings didn't just build palaces, they built obelisks, or stelae. These weren't tiny stone markers. Some stood over 30 meters tall, carved from a single piece of granite. These stelae marked royal graves and showed off the architectural skill and wealth of the kingdom. To carve and transport something so massive, using no modern machinery, was a statement in itself. And while many of them have been damaged or stolen over the centuries, the ones that still stand today are powerful reminders of how far Aksum's ambition reached. By the 4th century, under the rule of King Ezana, Aksum would take another giant leap, one that would change its identity forever. By the early 4th century AD, Aksum was already thriving, wealthy, influential, and respected across the Red Sea world. But under King Ezana, the kingdom entered a new chapter. Ezana is perhaps the most famous ruler in Aksum's history, not just because of his power, but because of what he did with it. He came to the throne as a young boy, and for much of his early reign, he was guided by a tutor named Frumentius, a Syrian Christian who had been shipwrecked on the African coast and ended up in the Aksumite court. Over time, Frumentius gained the young king's trust, and eventually, the faith he carried from the outside world would take root in Aksum itself. Ezana's reign saw a significant turning point, the official adoption of Christianity. Around 330 AD, not long after the Roman Emperor Constantine legalized Christianity in the Roman world, Ezana declared it the official religion of Aksum. Crosses began to appear on coins, replacing older pagan symbols. Church construction began, and Frumentius was later appointed the first bishop of Aksum by the Patriarch of Alexandria, a move that connected Aksum directly to the broader Christian world. This wasn't just a personal decision by the king, it was a shift in identity. Aksum was now part of the Christian world, aligned with powerful empires like Rome and Byzantium. This also helped the kingdom in trade and diplomacy. Shared religion made it easier to connect with powerful allies, and Aksum became one of the earliest Christian states in the world, before most of Europe had even converted. But Ezana didn't only build churches and change religious symbols, he was also a conqueror. Under his rule, Aksum expanded south and west, conquering the neighboring kingdom of Kush, one of Africa's oldest and most storied civilizations. Inscriptions from Ezana's reign describe his military campaigns in great detail, often written in Greek and Sabaean, the languages of empire, trade, and diplomacy. These conquests weren't just about territory. They were about dominating trade routes and securing resources, and in doing so, Ezana ensured that Aksum's influence reached even farther than before. Under his leadership, Aksum had become a new kind of power, a Christian empire, with a strong military, a booming economy, and global connections. But while Ezana's reign was the high point, the centuries that followed would bring new challenges. By the 5th and 6th centuries AD, Aksum stood tall as one of the most important kingdoms in the known world. Its capital, a city of towering stelae, grand buildings, and thriving marketplaces, had become the heart of an empire that stretched from the Ethiopian highlands to the coasts of the Red Sea. Trade was still the beating heart of the kingdom. Caravans brought ivory, gold, frankincense, animal hides, and precious stones from the African interior. Ships sailed in and out of Aksumite ports, especially Adulis, which had become one of the most important commercial hubs on the Red Sea coast. What made Aksum especially powerful during this time wasn't just the volume of trade, but its position. It was the link between the Roman-Byzantine world, the Arabian Peninsula, India, and even as far as China. Traders from Constantinople, Persia, and the Indian subcontinent passed through Aksumite markets. In return, Aksum imported silk, glassware, spices, and wine. Its coinage, minted in gold, silver, and bronze, was used widely and remains one of the clearest signs of Aksum's international status. It was the first sub-Saharan African kingdom to issue its own coins, complete with inscriptions in Greek, often showing Christian crosses and royal portraits. This wasn't just a sign of wealth, it was a message. Aksum was not a backwater kingdom. It was part of the global network of powerful civilizations. At home, Aksumite society was a mix of cultures and influences. The people spoke Ge'ez, a Semitic language that became the liturgical language of the Ethiopian Church and survives today in religious texts. Aksumite kings issued inscriptions in multiple languages, to communicate with local populations and foreign powers alike. The architecture of the kingdom, especially the tall obelisks and monumental buildings, reflected a combination of African, Arabian, and Mediterranean styles. Religion continued to evolve too. Christianity was spreading more widely, becoming deeply rooted in the culture and identity of the people. Churches replaced temples, and Christian art and symbols began appearing in local design, carvings, and manuscripts. One of the most fascinating aspects of Aksum's golden age is how well connected it was, and how highly it was regarded by other great powers. A Persian writer once listed Aksum as one of the world's 4 great kingdoms, alongside Persia, Rome, and China. That wasn't an exaggeration. Aksum had proven itself militarily, economically, and spiritually. It had taken its place among the giants of the ancient world, not just surviving, but thriving in the middle of one of history's most complex and competitive regions. But this golden age would not last forever. As the world around Aksum began to change, so too would its fortunes. As the centuries moved forward, Aksum began to face growing challenges, both from within and beyond its borders. The prosperity it had built through trade and diplomacy started to erode in the face of shifting power dynamics in the Red Sea and the wider world. One of the most significant turning points came in the 7th century AD with the rise of Islam. The new Arab Muslim powers quickly expanded across the Arabian Peninsula, taking control of key trade routes and ports that had once been part of Aksum's economic network. Cities like Mecca and Medina rose in influence, while Islamic merchants began dominating the maritime trade of the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. As Muslim control tightened around the Red Sea, Aksum's port at Adulis became isolated. This was a devastating blow. Adulis had been the kingdom's main link to the international trade system. Losing it meant a loss of wealth, influence, and connection to the broader world. Inland, Aksum still maintained control over its highland territories, but without maritime access, it could no longer act as a commercial hub. At the same time, environmental pressures were beginning to take a toll. Evidence suggests that climate change, including deforestation and soil exhaustion, began affecting agricultural productivity in the Ethiopian highlands. Without consistent crop yields, sustaining a large population and complex infrastructure became more difficult. There's also reason to believe that internal divisions and shifting political alliances contributed to Aksum's decline. As central authority weakened, local rulers and provincial leaders may have started asserting more independence, fragmenting the once unified kingdom. Religious differences could have played a part too. While Aksum remained staunchly Christian, it was now surrounded by a rapidly expanding Islamic world. Its position, once a strength, had become a vulnerability. Surrounded and cut off, the kingdom slowly began retreating from its coastal cities and turning inward toward the mountains. By the 8th and 9th centuries AD, Aksum was no longer the mighty empire it had once been. It had lost its access to trade, its architectural grandeur had faded, and its influence on the international stage had diminished. Yet, it wasn't completely destroyed. The people and culture of Aksum didn't vanish. They adapted. The kingdom gradually gave way to a series of smaller successor states in the highlands, which carried forward many of Aksum's traditions, language, and religious heritage. Christianity remained strong in the region, and the Ge'ez script and liturgy continued to be used in churches and religious writings. What's remarkable is that the legacy of Aksum didn't end with its political decline. It lived on in the cultural memory of Ethiopia, shaping the identity of the region for centuries to come. Even after its decline as a political and economic power, the Kingdom of Aksum left behind a legacy that would shape the Horn of Africa for centuries. Its memory endured, not just in ruins or texts, but in living traditions, language, religion, and national identity. Aksum is often considered the cultural and historical foundation of what would later become Ethiopia. The Christian faith introduced during the reign of King Ezana remained deeply rooted in the region. While the rest of North Africa gradually converted to Islam, the Ethiopian highlands preserved a form of Christianity that had been directly influenced by early Eastern traditions. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still uses Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language that evolved from Aksumite inscriptions. This survival of an early Christian kingdom in the heart of Africa became something of a legend in medieval Europe. European travelers and writers began speaking of a mysterious Christian king in the east, Prester John, who ruled a wealthy, hidden kingdom somewhere beyond the Islamic world. That myth, often linked to Aksum and later Ethiopian rulers, inspired centuries of exploration and fantasy. It also reminded the world that Ethiopia's Christian heritage stretched far back in time, independent of European influence. But the legacy wasn't just spiritual. Aksum's influence also lived on in Ethiopia's monarchy. Later rulers of Ethiopia would claim descent from the kings of Aksum, and even further, from the biblical King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. This connection, whether symbolic or historical, helped legitimize their rule and root the country's political identity in a deep, ancient past. The Solomonic dynasty, which ruled Ethiopia for hundreds of years until the 20th century, saw itself as the direct heir to Aksum's greatness. Archaeologically, the remnants of Aksum continue to speak. The massive stelae, now weathered by time, still tower over the landscape. They were not just monuments to kings, they were symbols of order, power, and connection to the heavens. The ruins of palaces, inscriptions, and tombs tell the story of a society that valued engineering, spirituality, and contact with the wider world. Modern excavations in Aksum and surrounding areas have helped piece together more of this story, filling in gaps left by foreign records and oral traditions. And in a broader historical sense, Aksum challenges many of the stereotypes about ancient African civilizations. It was not an isolated or primitive society. It was a literate, urban, and international empire, trading with Rome, Persia, India, and Arabia. It had its own written language, minted coins, built grand structures, and participated in the religious and political shifts of the late ancient world. Its history serves as a reminder that sub-Saharan Africa was never cut off from the forces that shaped global history. It was an active participant. Today, the city of Aksum still exists, though far smaller than it once was. It remains a spiritual center for Ethiopian Christians, a site of pilgrimage, and a focus of national pride. Tourists and scholars alike visit its monuments, walk its ancient streets, and try to imagine what life was like in one of Africa's great early kingdoms. In classrooms and documentaries, Aksum is being rediscovered, not as a footnote to other empires, but as a powerful civilization in its own right. And perhaps that's the true legacy of Aksum. It stood at the crossroads of worlds, African, Arabian, Mediterranean, and carved out its own identity. It didn't need to imitate others to become great. It was great because it was Aksum.